Good evening to all of you. Tonight this is a special lecture, no? It's the lecture that is chosen by the student body, so it's something that comes from all of you, and we're welcoming Oana Stanescu. She is the founder and partner of Family, in conjunction with Dong-Ping Wong. Their design practice is based in New York, and just opening their website, one gets a sense that their office is inventive, collaborative, ecologically minded, and easy. Yes, easy. Easy in the visualization, crude renderings, easy in the diagramming, black and white immediate sketches, and easy in the naming of the projects. Catchy literal description that more often than not end up being the subject matter of the design. But looking effortless is very different than involving no effort, and looking easy is very different than being easy. And as a testament to that stands one of the projects that I really loved about her work is a plus-shaped Olympic-sized swimming pool that floats and cleans the water at the same time on the East River in Manhattan. What an idea. Started in 2010. Their concept was to make a filtration system that would remove bacteria, contaminants, and odors to make water swimmable and pump over 500,000 gallons of clean water back into the water of the river around them every day. It sounds like a perfect OMA project, which is not by chance. And because in a perfect OMA fashion, they started a nonprofit, which allowed them to be their own clients and not having anybody else to tell them what to do, and preserve all the goals, the ambition, and the dream that they originally envisioned for the project. And in a perfectly OMA fashion, with 2 Kickstarter campaigns, they have been able to raise, I'm saying numbers, but I don't know, I found many numbers online, 300,000, half a million, maybe more. So it's quite fantastic for architects to be able to fund their own projects to the level they achieve. Worth mentioning is that her partner is California-born, so it's coming from us, and Oana is from Romania, so it's quite close to where I come from. And they met as interns at Rex in New York, the New York office founded by Joshua Prince Ramos and OMA together. And before founding Family, Oana worked at different award-winning practices, and I think the one that you will recognize maybe in her work in terms of influence are probably Herzog & de Meuron and Sana. In terms of the firm's ability to gather the attention of the mass media, I think that projects like Plus Pool really benefit from the fact that Oana has been working with clients of the caliber of the musician, designer, and entrepreneur Kanye West, which I'm sure all of you know much more than I do about his inventions and performances. She designed this monumental 50 feet tall volcano for his tour. So who does that? You know, that's phenomenal achievement for architects. Another client of note is the director of Kanye West, Virgil, for whom they designed a series of interior stores in Hong Kong and many other locations called Off-White. So for Oana, the future holds a lot more of these, and I'm sure that tonight we'll hear about the phenomenal projects they have in their office, and also the Plus Pool, which seems to be about to be completed in 2019, and a full semester at GSD, leaving behind MIT and Columbia University. So please join me in welcoming Oana to the stage. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the very kind introduction. Let me see if I can figure this out. Yeah, so I'm Oana Stanescu. I'm half of Family, a New York-based design office. Thank you for spending your Wednesday afternoon with me, and thank you for your vote of confidence. I understood it was a lecture selected by you guys, by the students, which is quite an honor. I always like being in California, and it's always a good excuse to be in LA. And actually, the last time, I used to spend quite a lot of time here. The last time I was supposed to come here was back in January, I believe, to work with friends on a project that at the time, sorry, so it was January, to work with friends on a project that sounded pretty much ideal from many points of view. Instead, I got diagnosed with lung cancer, so that project didn't exactly happen. I know none of you signed up for this, so I'll be brief. I'm in good health, it's all good, or so they told me at least. But all of that to say that something like that does put things in perspective, and it certainly did for me. So I spent a lot of the last year really just walking through woods and thinking and questioning everything that I do. And naturally, I always took a lot of joy in my work, so it was only natural that my work was being questioned just as much as all my other kind of existentialist issues. And I realized in doing so, I realized that really architecture for me is merely an excuse. In a way, it's my contribution to the world. It's what, for better or worse, I've been doing for quite a while now, and what I think I know kind of how to do. But also, it's my excuse to make a difference, because I have a really strong belief that that's what design does at its best. It really makes a difference. Architecture affects the way we live. It affects the way we interact with each other. It affects the way we spend time on this planet. So yeah, it does make a difference for better or worse, actually. I'm originally from Romania, and one of my earliest memories is when Ceaușescu, our then president, and you know, the notion of presidency has been loose in the recent years, so I'm going to call him that. When he went from being celebrated as a god to being shot almost live on TV overnight, and by watching a regime fall in such a short amount of time, it really makes you aware of how frail the constructed world around us is. Architecture was a very, and I'm sorry for how pixelated these images are, but architecture was a very, unfortunately, efficient tool for communism. On the one hand, it was manifested through these substandard apartment buildings organized in dormitory neighborhoods. Dormitory neighborhoods because that's all you could do in those neighborhoods, meaning the apartments did not have living rooms. They had kitchens and bedrooms. The idea of a living room or the idea of living there was quite exotic, actually. But they were symbols, basically, of mass dislocation of people, which was a tool used to weaken communities. Needless to say, it led to a myriad of social problems. On the other hand, Ceaușescu had gone to North Korea and China, learning from the best, coming back with ideas of a desire to have his own monuments to his own self, to his own image. This is the so-called People's Palace. It's one of the largest buildings in the world, I believe even larger than the Pentagon, the most expensive administrative building, but the price was not just economic. At the time, food was being rationed in the country. It was also not just human, people were being dislocated and also gave their lives working on this building, but it was a lot deeper because this building, believe it or not, is in downtown Bucharest, which is a typical European city. So in order for something at this scale to happen, it implied a lot of destruction. And destruction not just of history, but along with that also of people's memory. Ironically, or not so much, these very grand gestures and boulevards became the very kind of downfall of Ceaușescu too. Now, my partner, Dong, he's from a rather different type of setting, one that might be more familiar to you, sunny Southern California. Grew up stuffing his face in burritos, that's a quote. That's him at a surfing competition in the 90s. So luckily his surfing career didn't take off, and he resorted to architecture, studied on the West Coast, moved to New York with a short stint in London. And that is where we met. After a short brief kind of stopover in Spain, we met in New York working at Rex. There was the two of us in the back. So what had happened, we look pretty grumpy there, but what had happened is almost overnight for me, I was working, or we were both working on this $500 million project in downtown Louisville, and I was working on a skyscraper, although I had only seen one on the way to the office, and on a multi-million, very contemporary museum of art, although I hadn't even been to MoMA yet. Kind of questionable decisions, I might add, but we had a lot of fun in that office at the time. My trajectory then became a little bit more erratic. I went back home, did my thesis, ended up working in Japan at a boutique office. then in South Africa at kind of doing humanitarian architecture, then started to work with a photographer, Iwan Ban, curating architecture and interviewing architects, and writing about it, being on the other side of the table for once, seeing amazing things in the process. Just a couple of random images. This is a laundromat on the top of a 15-story tall building in Maputo in Mozambique. You can imagine the ladies back in the day kind of washing while the laundry while seeing the city at their feet. We traveled together to places like Uganda. This is a school in Rakai, or Mali in Timbuktu. Back to Europe, where I worked for a design firm, and eventually found my way back to New York. Well, this whole experience, though, of my rather erratic kind of gypsying around the world was, in retrospect, I think my way of getting a second education, partially because I didn't get in any of the schools that I ended up teaching now. But on the other hand, there was a big learning process, in the sense there's two main observations or two main things that I took away from these experiences. One was that our people inhabit and experience and relate to architecture in very different ways around the world. And the second one is that architecture can be done in very different ways. And these two observations, I think, put a sort of pressure on me to find my own voice within this context. So then we founded Family. So when we started our professional careers, Dong and I, this was before the crisis. If you remember what was happening from an architectural point of view at the time, people were building the tallest, the roundest, the squiggliest, the weirdest, the most literal type of building, monuments to egos at times. But by the time we were ready to start our own professional careers, things had changed quite dramatically. And witnessing that, it was a really rough time in architecture. I hope you won't have to go through that. Very likely you will. But it did instill a sense of, it made us look, I think that combined with our backgrounds, it made us look for a sense of purpose and responsibility in our work. So we kind of tried to articulate what we wanted to do, and we knew we wanted to make a difference or just create better things, better environments, better buildings, better cities. So I'm going to go real quick through a series of projects that early experiments and then some later built work, and then spend a longer time on one of these projects. This is the kind of unofficial version of it. All right, so one of our first early projects is called Dallas Peaks, a housing block that creates energy for the city. It was a 600,000 square feet high density residential project in downtown Dallas. It was an entire block. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to change a typology of wasteful consumption and turn it into one of ecological productivity. We made an observation that if you analyze typical apartment buildings or typical just extruded boxes, if you will, through a very simple gesture, we could radically increase the ecological productivity, meaning by simply cutting a building into so-called peaks, the average depth of floor plates is cut in half. Through that, you can take advantage of more natural lighting and natural ventilation and reduce considerably the building's energy demand. In the same time, we're able to maximize the ability to capture both wind and solar energy. So the sloped edges of the peaks act as wind accelerating edges, and by minimizing the shadow, we're able to radically increase the amount of solar power being produced. So with that, it's one of those strange projects where at least one of us spent a lot of time in Excel. Maybe, hopefully that's not too visible, but we were able to produce more energy that the block demanded, and that allowed, actually, we had an economical model in mind too, where the block was able to sell energy back to the grid, to the city, and have a sort of revenue that could cater to the operation or maintenance of the building. A very different type of project, this was a competition in Slovenia in Maribor, is the brief asked for the design for a footbridge over the river of Drava. And this was the location of the footbridge, so right next to this big, pretty amazing structure, steel bridge, which was catering for the cars. And as you know, a bridge is the shortest point between, or the shortest distance between point A and B, but we kind of stubbornly failed at that. What we proposed instead, what we realized actually was that, and you can kind of see it in this image, the shores, there isn't a lot of space on the shores to program or to allow for things to happen. So we realized that the actual most interesting spot to be was on the bridge, on the water. So we wanted to create a kind of opportunity to spend time there. You could still easily cross, maybe it would take a little bit longer, but you could also just go and spend time on the water and on the bridge. These are some of the technical drawings. We had to also allow for boats to pass under it, and oftentimes I think we're being accused of the architecture being too simplistic or too single gesture, so I'm just gonna pretend we did more work here and show some of the structural drawings, which were quite a lot of fun to develop. Because oftentimes to actually pull off something that looks rather effortless or very simple, it involves a lot of effort. So the bridge also passes under the existing steel bridge, allowing people to just spend some time, bike in circles endlessly on the river. A very different type of project than for Virgil Abloh of Off-White. He's a very interesting character. He used to be, or is, Kanye West's creative director. He runs a brand called Off-White, which is getting bigger and bigger, hugely popular. He's also a DJ and probably takes around 8 flights at least a week. It's kind of impossible to keep up with him. So the very first store for his brand was in Hong Kong on a very generic or typical shopping street. I'm sure you're familiar, whether it's Louis Vuitton next to Alexander McQueen, next to everyone else. But this was a young brand's first store, and in a way you can't really compete with those brands when it comes down to shop windows. So if you're familiar with Hong Kong, there's this kind of stark border between the natural, super lush, super rich environment and the concrete city. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to replicate some of that in the store. So this is kind of like a diagram, bringing that dichotomy into our project. This is a plan shot of a model. So what we proposed is creating this garden, if you will, or this natural, typical Hong Kong environment instead of a shop window. So giving up, we were able to convince the client, or this only works if the client is open-minded enough to give up a third of his retail floor space to create something unique in the city and stand out without competing directly with the brands that he's surrounded by. So these are still model shots, but that's how the shop window looks. To the uninitiated, people, they wouldn't necessarily know what this is, but the way it actually is strangely works in the sense that oftentimes if you're in the store, you will see people pass and then come back and look and kind of check it out. And that applies to people interested in the brand and also not so much. The people that love this brand, they're hugely aware of Virgil. He has a huge following on social media, so they use this space as a destination. But somehow the surprise of it being a place of pause in the city on a shopping street really helped, I think, the brand create an interesting place. So this is the interior which we kind of designed or modeled after a quarry. The goal with this was to, in a way, to allow Virgil to use it in any way he wanted, meaning if he wanted to exhibit or to sell just a pair of shoes, kind of turn it into a concept store, he could easily do that. He could also play without the store feeling empty or unused. If he wanted to play a DJ set, he could also do that with these kind of shelves acting as stairs or places of sitting. But if they had a huge sale or they wanted to fill the store with product, they could also do that. Again, a couple of views. There's a bench. People sometimes hang out there. It also rains in that place, and there's bird sounds for what is worth it. We've been working with Virgil quite a lot, and it's been fun. He has an architecture background, and so it's rather easy to work with him. This is a display table we did where, in retail there's always a lot of, it's a very kind of fast-paced world, so sometimes in this particular case, we didn't really want to build something that was to be demolished within a month. So we just wondered if we could use the materials in a most direct way for display and then reuse them for the next project. This is another project in Singapore, also done for him, and another one in Shanghai. A project of a different nature is the stage set that we designed for Kanye West for his tour for Yeezus. I believe that was about 3 years ago. So this was one of those rare things where this was one of the first sketches we ever did for that project, with the project in mind. And after a couple of really hard months of trying a lot of developing the design in a lot of different directions, this is what the opening act, opening moment looked like. When you work with Kanye, one of the amazing thing is, and I always want to make that clear, is you work with a lot of other people. So we did play a role in this, but we were lucky to work alongside Virgil, for that matter, Vanessa Beecroft, artists, musicians, in a really fascinating process. Part of this actually was also witnessing the way the album was made, Yeezus, and becoming part of that. I always loved music. I never really understood how it's done, unfortunately. But seeing the album come together, see it evolve over 6 months, and become its final product, actually was, I think, was hugely inspirational for me and left a permanent mark. It's kind of when you understand the thread between all creative fields and how they relate to each other, whether it's a concept in music or in architecture or in art, and see that it's a very similar creative process of editing things and revisiting and editing and kind of letting it mature and grow into something of its own. These were some of the collages that we were trying to use. It was unusual, or it was difficult, or maybe not difficult, it was interesting or challenging to work on something that your contribution is only part of it, meaning that mountain would not come to life without Kanye. So it's really that single person, the music, the effects that really bring it to life. So in that sense, it was a rather unusual project for us. And these were some of the early studies where we were trying to create different kind of worlds with it. This is how it looks in daylight without any of the effects around it. So it's quite a different experience. And this is how it felt during the concert, just a couple of the moments that it created. And of course, working in such a world always exposes you to rather unusual moments such as this. I'm in the back trying to hide. A project of a different nature in nature is a competition that we did for a museum called Gösta in Finland. It's a museum for the largest collection of Finnish art. And it's in this building in a really pristine setting. It looks absolutely amazing. And on this side, they have a couple of buildings. You can barely see them. They're kind of hidden between the trees. They needed to expand, and I think that's a problem that many museums face. But unfortunately, the fear was that the program they required was so big that it was going to compete, or that it was completely competing with the existing building, and also risking of really making a negative impact on the quality of the site. And we wanted to avoid that by all means. So what we did instead, we kind of broke the program down. In white, you see the existing buildings on the site, and in green, it's basically the way we broke down the program. The program is really funny. Whatever you build in Finland, whatever public program you build in Finland, it always needs to have a sauna for some reason, which I find really fascinating. So some of those things are, the little White House, for example, is a sauna which needed an extension. So all these programs had to also be able to operate independently. Part of the intention with this, in creating this so-called village, was that we also create a new heart, like a public plaza. Like the centerpiece is not the centerpiece, or the iconicity, if you will, of the museum, of the expansion of the museum, is not a new building, but really a place that it creates where all these spaces come together. This also allowed for a curation of the program in different ways, as a museum-wide show, independent shows, or just after hours and independent access in the building. Or a wholesome event involving all buildings on site. This is how the plan looked. It was quite detailed, but one thing that it doesn't really show, and one thing that was important to us too, was typically when you go in the museum, you're completely removed from the world around you, and you just get immersed into the art and then you're in and out. But in this case, the site was such a strong and powerful part of the experience that we wanted to integrate that in the museum. So could you design the museum, or that was kind of one of our ambitions, to design the museum in such a way that experiencing the art felt like experiencing the site simultaneously and not having two distinct experiences, also considering that Finland gets really cold in winter. So this was part of the circulation, the way we envision it, where between galleries you are meandering really through this really amazing site. Some things that weren't quite visible before too is we learned, or we wanted the architecture to learn a lot from the natural environment from the site. The site had quite a few topographic challenges and sectional changes. So the building kind of took that language on and also created a series of various experiences. This is one of the main galleries, and you're always aware of where you are, making the museum site-specific. And this is how the final submission, the final design looked like. And the second to last project is a commercial space that we did for a brand called Need in Richmond, Virginia. And the interesting thing is, it's quite a, I'd say, probably fairly common story in this day and age, where it started initially as a tiny store in Richmond, but then really it became huge because of its online presence. So people all over the States for sure know it. But then they wanted to really expand their brick and mortar store. But people related to it more as a community than actually a store. So it's a common problem, right, with commercials, with stores, or with retail today. To just retail, just selling things does not really get people to go to a store anymore. You can just do that online and return things really easily, so why bother? So, and we realized there was a huge community around the brand of Need. It's founded by two partners, two guys that are really amazing. So we wanted the store to reflect that. So in a way, can we make it that the community is the priority and the collection, not necessarily secondary, but an additional thing that the store does, but that you feel inclined to just go and hang out, learn about the brand, just breathe, just read, without necessarily feeling the pressure of shopping. So we created these two spaces, almost, you can think of it as like in a library where you have a reading room and then the bookshelves. I think that's a pretty straightforward way of looking at it. These were some of the early sketches. So we combined the bookshelf basically with the reading area into the singular wall that had two faces and was doing two simultaneous things. This is the plan. So the centerpiece, the wooden part, is what we call the communal area, and surrounding it are the so-called stacks, or really where the product is being displayed. Early model shot, and this is how the store looks. You can see the two faces with the clothing in the back, which we shouldn't call the back, and then the community area on the other side. This was on opening day. All right, and now I want to talk a little bit about the pool, one of our biggest projects, a little bit more in depth. And I'm going to split it in two parts. So the Plus Pool is the world's first water filtering floating pool. What does that mean? It means it filters over 600,000 gallons of river water every single day. The way that works is, and by the way, there are no whales in East River. People really picked up on that online. But the way it filters the river water is there's a filtration system built in within the walls of the pool. It's a layered filtration system where each layer kind of filters smaller and smaller things. The way this happened, or why we came up with it, was when you live in New York, it's really easy to forget that Manhattan is an island and the city is surrounded by water. People used to really take advantage of the waterways. They used to swim. It used to be a huge social scene. Up until about 100 years ago, there used to be 20 river baths all around the city. And it's unfortunately that today we're not allowed to go closer to the water. Ironically, there's a lot of development happening along the water, parks coming up, but there's no intention. It's always just happens all the way to the water, but don't touch the water. The reason for that are these CSO, combined sewage overflows, all these red dots that you see along the map, it's every time it rains in New York, which is quite often. Sewage is being, whenever it rains too hard, for example, the sewage is being basically dumped into the river, which sounds terrible. So this is a map of showing the quality of the water in New York, and you can imagine what the brown stands for. So what we proposed is, can we reclaim some of this water? Can we really make the point that our waterways shouldn't be treated this way? And that's how the pool came about. It's the story or the point behind the shape is New Yorkers can be very demanding, so we try to make everyone happy by offering a multitude of functions. So you have a kids pool, a lab pool, a sports pool, and a lounge pool, meaning a whole family can go and each member can do his own thing, combined into a plus-shaped pool, this being the design. It's of course reminiscent also of the New York City grid, and really the whole point is just that you should be able to swim on a hot, gross New York summer day in the water. So in order for that to happen, we had to really learn what it means. We had to develop that filtration. Such a filtration does not exist. There's different types of water filtrations being applied in with different purposes, but none for this. So we started working with Columbia University, and we literally learned how to filter water and how to test water. We were testing waters for these 15 parameters. Number 3, fecal coliform, is the most important one. I'm sure you know what that means. This was one of the first tests that we did. So each vertical line that you see in this tank represents one layer of filtration. And we were pumping in river water and kind of testing the effects of the filters on the quality of the water. This was our office at the time, a small lab, which we were quite geeky and really excited about. It was all new to us. We're all designers and architects, so none of us had ever done something like that before. We then eventually, a couple of years later, did in-river water testing. So this is the float lab. The tub that you see hanging in the air are basically, there were 3 tubs like this, which had filters, different kind of filter combinations on its side. And here you can see the 3 tubs together, which allowed us to simultaneously test the ability of the filters to properly clean the river water. That's our water engineer, Greg. He's Canadian and he's awesome. And that was his office for about 3 months. It's a pretty sweet spot to be in. And we're very lucky to actually find him. We analyzed the whole data, and what you see on this chart is basically the evolution of the effect of the combination of filters. Meaning, in blue you see the quality of the water within the test tubs. In light gray, it's the quality of bacteria level in the water in the actual river. And the red line signifies the pool quality water requirement by code. So the first 13 weeks didn't look so great, actually. It was a rather depressing time. But we had success at certain moments, like week 7 or week 9. But at times, we were still not able to necessarily filter out the bacteria level. However, in week 13, we were able to find the right kind of combination of filters and really dramatically reduce the amount of bacteria in the level. So this is the chart showing the kind of less beautiful chart, just showing from week 13 onwards. The quality in blue is the quality of the water within our test tubs, and in red is the bacteria level in the river. It fluctuates dramatically because of basically the amount of rain. So we celebrated by jumping into that tiny, tiny pool, hoping that soon we can do it properly. But the other aspect of the project that I want to talk about is how this project came to be. And basically, it comes down to doing things without anyone asking you to do it. So we had this idea of a plus-shaped pool. We thought it's silly, and we thought if you live in New York, you should be able to swim in that water. If you live in an island, it only makes sense. So we started working. We asked our friends Playlab, who run a graphic design company, the Office of Playlab, to help us make a website and a book and some posters. And we sent the book out to a bunch of people, random offices. We said on the back of the book we're looking for architects, engineer, water filtration specialists. We didn't even know if that existed, naval engineers, so on and so forth. And luckily, I think it was also a special moment in time, and I think this only could have happened in New York. But New Yorkers like to speak about themselves, so it was picked up by the media pretty fast and kind of blew up in our faces almost overnight. This is Jeff from PlayLab on Chinese television, and your parents only start taking you seriously if you make it on Letterman. One of the things that happened in this phase was basically we send these things out, but within the first couple of weeks we got a call from Arab. I'm pretty sure Dong first hung up on them because he thought it was a joke. And the second time around, they just said, wait, we want to be part of this. And we said, part of what? It's a website. But it was people like that, people calling us up and people really being really excited about it and seeing hundreds of people online just really getting into it and reacting to what essentially was just a couple of renderings and diagrams. That really is at it's what kept us going. We got approached by the mayor of Sydney. He was actually one of the most pressing, I'd say, people interested in the project, but we wanted to stay committed to New York. But what happened is we realized also really fast that actually a large majority of the world's largest cities are on waterfronts and they all deal with the exactly same issue. So we started talking to a lot of different cities too. So with that kind of input, we did 2 Kickstarter campaigns. The first one, we raised over $40,000. The second one, over $250,000. And these 2 Kickstarter campaigns allowed us to basically prove the filtration and do the water testing that I was showing earlier. In order to convince people to buy into a project like that, you need to learn to kind of communicate a project to them. So one of the campaigns that we did as part of Kickstarter was this tile campaign. Similarly, the way every gallery in the States always has someone's name, or even if you go in Central Park, every bench has someone's name on it. We wanted people to feel that when they contribute to the project, that they almost like they literally start building it. So each tile eventually will have a person's name or someone's text written on it. It's almost like you're investing in your kind of building your own spot at the pool already in advance. People had a really crazy fun with it. Oftentimes it's people from all over the world, people who say, I'm a swimmer, I'm never going to come to New York, but that sounds like a great idea. Other people proposed with such styles. It was really heartwarming. And this is one of my favorite slides, although it's completely illegible, and I think that's actually part of its secret. All these names that you see on this slide are people who donated money, a lot of them also a lot of time for this project. And whenever we hit a rough patch, it's always this that we think back to, because it's this many people that thought that the project is really worthwhile and really a good idea. And I think it's very telling in that sense. Actually, we did an updated version which we sent to Mayor de Blasio a couple of days ago, in which we have almost 10,000 signatures or names of people who are supporting the project and believe in it and put their money on it too. It was, I believe, a 50-page document that we sent him. So in order for that to happen, for the project to happen, we decided to make a nonprofit, learning from the founders of the Highline. The nonprofit is called Friends of Pluspool. These are the 4 founders, Archie and Jeff from PlayLab, Dong and myself. We got a big team together, a lot of people just volunteering, teams for very different fields, from energy to PR to engineering, naval engineering, or universities. We got a lot of support, political one, but also from art or cultural institutions. This is Kara Meyer, our first full-time employee, holding the proof that we became a nonprofit. It was quite a big day for us. And having a nonprofit also means you get to have a board. This is also one of those slides that still gives me goosebumps, because you really have amazing people, like Joshua David, the founder of the Highline, or Karen Wong, deputy director of New Museum. Basically, any single person who's on the slide is putting their time and energy behind the project. Running a nonprofit means you need to learn how to fundraise, how to throw galas. We were all new to this. We still are, actually. So it's a process for sure. This was one of our first galas at Jane's Carousel in Brooklyn Bridge Park, where we had originally shown the pool in the rendering. And it was really touching because a lot of people showed up. So all of a sudden you had politicians, you had swimmers, you had artists, you had architects, you had nerds all in the same room. So it was really amazing in that sense. It's one of those things at the first gala, you really don't know, is it going to be just 5 of us or is everyone actually going to show up? But it was quite amazing, and this is Connor Dwyer. He's a gold Olympic medalist. He always has the medal on him, apparently. It's really heavy. It's quite impressive, actually, in a sense. And if anyone needed another argument for swimming, you could definitely tell when he and the rest of the swimmers walked into the room. But we throw a lot. We always throw in summer a pool party, which is a lot of fun, and the fundraising gala in fall. And one other thing that we did, and no one asked us to, is we are really, the reason we founded the nonprofit is we were asked multiple times by developers to just sell them the shape, basically, or to just have them build a pool as a luxury amenity to their condo buildings. But we were never interested in that, partially because the project would not be alive or would not have a life, was it not for really people believing in it in the community. And so what we wanted to do is we want to make sure when the pool opens that it's as free as possible, as accessible to all communities and to people from all over New York. So one of our missions is to run an educational program. So what we started doing is we started working with Sacred Heart, which is this pool on the Upper East Side in New York, and we started giving free swimming lessons to kids. We partnered with Nycha, which is the New York Housing Authority. And last year was the first year, so we had around 30 students. This year it was 80 kids who learned how to swim. The goal of this is by the time the pool is ready to open, we already have the knowledge and experience of running an educational program, but also we will have a couple of 100 kids by then who learned how to swim. Again, this is an island. Sandy wasn't even so long ago. People should know how to swim, and it's really a problem oftentimes. What happened too is parents that were bringing the kids oftentimes to the pool, they were saying, but I want to learn how to swim too. So we realized there is actually a lot of need for programs like that. And there's nothing more touching than when you go there and see them have fun and really giggle and, you know, fool around in the water, but really be truly excited. Again, this is all happening in summer. You can see they're all wearing matching t-shirts or towels. They were designed by our friend Mike Perry. And really all of this is, the excuse for all of this is this swimming pool. But one of the important parts that I want to underline, or why this is huge for us, or one of the bigger points that we're trying to make with it is, if a project usually starts with, you know, a policy in place, a client puts the funding together, finds a site, eventually puts a team together who is then asked to come up with a design. What we did in this case is we kind of flipped the whole process. We started with the design, which then allowed us to put a team together. We're still looking for a site or choosing the right site for it, which enables the proper funding and eventually, hopefully, a change in policy, which will allow for further such projects to happen. And this is hugely important because one thing we always say is, if we were to wait for someone to approach us to design the world's first water filtering floating pool, it would have been a really long wait. And really, do we always, you know, what's the agency of the architect in this? Are we always just waiting or for something to happen, for someone to approach us, or can we actually generate ideas and put them out there and see if they can have a life of their own without depending necessarily on the people who are typically in charge of such programs? And really, all of this is to achieve something very simple and very banal, if you will, and that's that idea of just swimming in the water. Thank you.